It was about 6 a.m. when I opened the door of my lonely home in the Adirondacks and inhaled the fresh forest air, smelling of pine trees and morning dew. I, Aidan Brody, a former journalist turned new writer, wasn't quite awake yet. I had just stepped out in my worn flannel shirt and shoes, yawning and dreaming of a strong coffee that would help me wake up and start another day of my self-imposed isolation in the middle of the wilderness. And at that moment I froze as if I had been electrocuted, because a few steps away from me was a huge black bear. His presence seemed to fill the entire space around me, making the air heavy and still. The animal didn't move, didn't growl, didn't show any signs of aggression. It just stood there on my porch, breathing heavily, trembling all over, its fur matted in places and wet, as if it had just come from a raging river or from a fierce battle with an unknown enemy. What struck me most were the bear's eyes, dark, moist, almost human-like, and it looked like it was actually crying. Tears streamed down his face like a broken faucet. I had never seen a wild animal truly cry in my life, and the sight went straight to my heart, making me forget all fear of this powerful creature that could crush my skull with a single swipe of its claw. Only then did I notice that the bear was holding a lifeless little cub in its mouth, its legs hanging limply, its head tilted to the side and showing no signs of life, like a rag doll dropped by a careless child. At that moment I realized it wasn't just a bear, but a mother with her dying child. I wanted to slam the door shut and reach for the old rifle hanging on the kitchen wall, the natural reaction of anyone who finds a wild animal on their doorstep. But something in her demeanor, in that quiet maternal despair, stopped me. It made me feel like this wasn't a threat, but a mother about to experience a tragedy so profound I couldn't name it. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would explode between my ribs, so I slowly backed away, never taking my eyes off the bear. To my horror, she followed me a few cautious steps, and then, with almost human kindness, placed her baby directly on the wooden floor of my balcony. Then she came back and sat on her hind legs, staring at me without blinking, as if she was waiting for something I couldn't yet understand. Against every survival instinct, against every story I'd heard about bear attacks, against every warning from the park rangers, I fell to my knees in front of the motionless cub. He looked very small, no bigger than a medium-sized spaniel, with protruding ribs and dried blood on one ear. And just when I was sure he was dead, his chest moved, just a tiny twitch, so small I might have missed it if I hadn't looked more closely. I looked at the mother bear, who was still staring at me with a strange, deliberate hopefulness, and the words came out of my mouth before I even had time to think. "I'll try, okay? I'll try to help him." The bear didn't move, as if it understood every word I said. My heart was about to burst when I carefully wrapped the shivering cub in my flannel shirt and walked slowly, without any sudden movement, into the house. I expected a growl or an attack at any moment, but the bear just sat there, silent, as if she knew something I hadn't picked up that might help. Towels, a heating pad, water bottles. I had acted more on instinct than knowledge. I kept looking out the window where the bear still sat, its unmoving shadow, its eyes fixed on my house. The cub was cold to the touch, limping but not completely gone, and I stood in the middle of the living room holding this almost lifeless little creature in thought. What the hell am I supposed to do now? And it was at that moment that I realized this wasn't just some freak encounter with a wild animal, not just some weird twist of fate. It was something more, something that had chosen me against all laws of nature and common sense. I wasn't prepared to take on this responsibility on launch, but it seemed the mother bear was too. She had decided to trust me. She waited quietly on the edge of my property, watching my house all day while I tried to rescue her cub, who seemed to refuse to leave this world without a fight. The cub lay on my couch among the towels, motionless and cold. She crouched down and gently pressed 2 fingers against his small ribs, feeling for a pulse or any sign of breathing. I felt nothing, held my breath and moved close enough to smell the earthy forest scent of his wet fur mixed with the metallic scent of blood. And at that moment I felt it, a slight rise and fall in his chest, a faint but real breath that made me breathe out in relief. "You're alive, baby. You're still here with us." I wrapped the little baby tightly in my flannel shirt and hurried to the back room, where I found an old fireplace. I plugged it in, turned it on full power, and put in all the soft things I could find: blankets, towels, pillows, and built a kind of cozy little nest for my little patient. His breathing was shallow, his chest barely moved, and one of his hind legs seemed oddly stiff, as if it were broken or paralyzed. The blood had dried into a dark crust around one of his ears, and it was clear that it wasn't just exhaustion or weakness, something serious had happened to him. I heard a scratching sound outside, and when I looked through the window, I saw that the mother bear was still there, sitting like an ancient statue, patiently watching over the house where her baby lay. I picked up my phone and called Rachel Kowalski, the closest veterinarian I knew, even though she usually treated farm animals. "Rachel, it's me, Aiden. I have a bear cub at my house. He's hurt very badly. The mother brought him to me and left him on my porch. He's still here, waiting outside." There was a long, doubtful silence before Rachel finally said, "Aiden, are you sure you haven't been drinking?" "No, damn it. I'm serious and I don't have time to explain. What do I have to do to keep him alive?" After another pause, she sighed and began giving me clear instructions. "Warm him up. Check for any open bleeding. Don't give him solid food yet, only liquids. You can make a mixture of honey and warm water and give him drop by drop. I'll call Jenny, she works at a wildlife rehabilitation center. Stay tuned, we'll be there soon." I hung up and went to the kitchen, where I found an old bottle of raw honey. I mixed it with warm water, and using a liposuction syringe, the closest thing to a pipette, I carefully opened the cub's mouth and allowed a few drops of the liquid to flow out. At first, there was no reaction, but after several tries his little tongue moved slightly and I felt a glimmer of hope. "That's it. Come on, little fighter. Stay with me." I sat beside him for probably over an hour, talking and humming and sometimes cursing under my breath in my helplessness, while the mother bear remained very quiet outside. She opened the door a crack and raised her head, looked into my eyes, and lowered it again. This simple gesture spoke of something completely unexpected. Believe me, I still remember and wonder how a wild animal managed to overcome its fear of humans. Around noon, the cub moved his paw for the first time, just a little, slowly, as if checking if his muscles were still working. I laughed out loud with relief and didn't even notice the tears streaming down my cheeks. "You won't die today, little one. Not on my watch," I whispered, looking at the cub even though I was panicking deep down, knowing full well I was just a writer with a handful of towels and a space heater trying to save a wild animal I knew nothing about. At midday, my living room looked like a mad animal hospital. Blankets were spread everywhere, towels piled high, the heater was on full blast, and a bear cub was lying right in front of it, wrapped up like a newborn with a tiny paw sticking out. The wound on his palm started bleeding again, and when I looked more closely, it looked like a bite wound, swollen, red, and clearly infected, which could kill him faster than cold or exhaustion. I grabbed some hydrogen peroxide, the kind I usually use to treat my cuts, and wet a washcloth with it, gently pressing it onto the wound. The cub flinched, and oddly enough, I was glad about that. The pain meant he was still fighting. His nervous system was still working. There was a low roar from outside, and I looked out the window again. Mother hadn't moved an inch. She was still sitting there, her huge body completely still, but her eyes followed every movement, every shadow in my house. I opened the door a little and said to her quietly, "He's still with us, barely, but he's holding on." Of course she didn't answer, didn't complain, but took a deep breath, as if she understood what I meant. I went home and sat on the floor next to the cub. I gave him more honey water, and this time he clicked his little tongue more clearly and tried to lick the sweet liquid, a small but definite sign of progress. My phone rang. It was Rachel again. "Jenny says you're crazy," she said, "but she'll meet you with the medicine. She'll be with you in a few hours." "Thank God," I told her quickly. "His palm is bleeding, it looks like a bite, and I think he has a fever. Keep him warm. Don't make any sudden movements. Keep giving him fluids. And for heaven's sake, don't open the door too wide." Rachel warned me, And I knew she was right. It was a miracle that the mother bear hadn't torn down the walls of my house looking for her baby. But she trusted me for some reason. And that fact made me even more nervous. An hour passed. Then another. The cub started to stir, trying to turn around, and I whispered quietly to him, "Quiet, buddy, not yet, just rest." Then he made an odd sound, not a growl, not a whimper, something in between, like a broken toy slowly coming back to life. I carefully cleaned his paw again. The bleeding had stopped, and the wound was still red and swollen, but it no longer looked serious, and I could deal with that. Outside, the mother bear showed signs of anxiety for the first time. She paced back and forth a few steps as if she couldn't decide whether to stay or go, then sat back down in her old spot. I lit the wood stove to make the house warmer. Although it was already stuffy for me, the cub needed warmth more than I needed fresh air. As evening fell, the shadows changed, and then a small miracle happened. The cub opened one eye, just one, and looked directly at me. There was no brutality in that look, no fear, just awareness, as if he saw me and somehow understood who I was. "You're not alone anymore, baby," I whispered, feeling a strange warmth inside me that had nothing to do with the fireplace. He blinked and went back to sleep, but for the first time that day I felt he could actually do it. Not a guarantee, not a promise, but a chance I hadn't had that morning. When Rachel and Jenny, the wildlife specialist, finally arrived, the sun had already set. The mother bear had retreated into the shadows of the forest, but she hadn't left. She was still watching the house from a safe distance. "Oh my God, that was no joke," Rachel breathed when she saw the cub, and Jenny immediately went to work, examining the little one with a professional eye. "This is a bite from an adult male," she said after a closer examination. "Sometimes male bears kill other cubs so the female can return to the nursery. This cub was lucky that his mother was able to rescue him and bring him to you. It's amazing that she chose a human. She was probably watching you before making this desperate move." The thought made me shudder. The idea that a wild animal could watch and judge me before entrusting me with his most precious possession. Jenny and Rachel spent several hours treating wounds, administering antibiotics, and restoring fluids to the little boy's body. When they left, the cub was breathing more evenly and his paw was professionally bandaged. "We'll leave you some medicine and instructions," Jenny said as she gathered her things. "But once he gets better, you have to return him to the wild. He can't stay with you forever." "Aiden." I nodded, even though deep down I felt how attached I was to this little creature who fought for its life right before my eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, the cub recovered with amazing speed. His wounds healed, his appetite returned, and he began to explore the world around him with curiosity, exploring my house with increasing confidence. I named him Baxter because it simply seemed right, although I knew I shouldn't name a wild animal, and I shouldn't get attached to one who would soon have to go back where he belonged. The mother bear returns every day, sometimes approaching home, but mostly keeping her distance, always alert, always on the alert. I would put food in front of her, and sometimes she would accept it and sometimes ignore it, as if she didn't want to rely on human help too much. One day, as Baxter was moving confidently around the house, playing and even trying to climb on the furniture, I received a surprise visit from Deputy Louise Gentry. "Aiden, I heard you had a bear cub with you and that its mother was staying on your property," she said, heading straight for the spot where the mother bear had stood 2 weeks earlier with her cub in her mouth. I wasn't trying to deny the obvious. I told her the whole story. She listened with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. When I finished, she just said, "You're very lucky no one was hurt, but this is a problem, Aiden. Animal control already knows. They want to come in 3 days to get the cub and maybe move the mother, too. I can hold them up a little, but it's your decision. You have to do something." I couldn't sleep that night. I watched Baxter curl up in his nest of blankets, so warm and so safe, just wrong for a wild animal. I knew I couldn't keep him here forever, that I couldn't treat him like a pet, that I couldn't deprive him of his chance to become what he was born to be. a free bear in the Adirondack woods. At the same time, the thought of letting him go hurt so much, it was like tearing a piece of myself out. In the morning, I made my decision. I didn't want to wait for the wildlife officials to show up. I didn't want to wait for Mom to have the courage to get it. I carefully placed Baxter in a large container lined with his familiar blankets. I added his favorite toy, an old tennis ball, and packed some travel food. Then I got into my car and drove deeper into the woods to a spot I thought might be near the mother bear's den. I drove slowly along the forest paths, watching carefully for any signs of bear activity, until I came to a small clearing surrounded by dense fir trees. I stopped the car and got out. The trash can was open and Baxter stared into the bright light and inhaled the familiar scents of the forest. "This is your real home, little one," I told her, feeling a lump in my throat. I stepped back to make room for him to climb up and look around on his own. He took a few hesitant steps, then stopped and looked at me as if asking what was going on, why we were here. Then we heard the cracking of branches. Mother was watching us from the edge of the clearing. She looked wary but not angry. Our eyes met, and I saw in her eyes again that strange interest I had seen on the first day. I slowly backed away to show her that I didn't mean to hurt her, and that I would release her cub and return it to the world it came from. Baxter froze and looked between his mother and me as if torn between two worlds, between trust and instinct, between human warmth and the call of the wild. The mother bear made a simple sound, a mixture of a growl and a purr, and the cub turned to her. Take a few hesitant steps. Stop. Then a few more steps. My heart threatened to break as I saw the distance between them shrink. A mother's love uniting two creatures separated by cruelty and chance. When they were almost together, Baxter suddenly turned and ran quickly towards me, pressing his little face against my knee as if to say goodbye, or perhaps to thank me. I'll never know for sure. I knelt down and allowed myself to stroke his soft fur again, whispering words he couldn't understand but could probably feel. Go and live your life, brave little one. You'll make it. Then she gently pushed him toward his mother, and this time he didn't hesitate. With small jumps he reached her, and she carefully sniffed his body up and down, as if making sure he was really okay, that he was really hers, alive and safe. Then something happened I didn't expect. The mother bear lifted her head and looked directly at me. To my surprise, she nodded slightly before turning and walking slowly into the forest, her cub in the lead, who only looked back once before disappearing forever into the trees. I stood in the clearing for a long time, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and peace, of loss and righteousness, as if I were completing the final chapter of a book I never planned to write but that had changed me forever. I returned to my empty house, which now seemed so peaceful, so spacious, without the little brown whirlwind that had turned everything upside down. I gathered the blankets, toys, and bowls, all relics of Baxter's stay, and put them in a box, carrying it up to the attic, knowing full well that I would not need them anymore, but also unable to separate myself from them. Months passed. I went back to my usual life. I wrote my book, walked through the forest, and enjoyed the silence. But sometimes, especially at dusk, I would go out onto the balcony with a cup of tea and look out at the edge of the forest, knowing that somewhere out there among the trees lived a bear cub who had once slept on my couch and drank honey from my hand. And one autumn morning, I walked out the door and saw a little gift on the porch, a handful of ripe cranberries, carefully placed in a small pile, as if someone had taken the time to collect them. There was no one around, but I knew who did it. I smiled and looked into the woods, where I thought I saw a shadow flickering. Maybe it was just a play of light, or maybe it was the mother and her cubs who had once been a part of my life, showing me that they were okay, that they remembered. Since then, every fall, when the leaves begin to change, I find little gifts on my porch: berries, pine cones, even a beautiful rock, as if someone is still trying to say, "We are still here, we remember, we are grateful." It reminds me that the most important encounters in our lives sometimes happen without warning, and that the deepest connections are formed in moments we least expect. Now, as I write my book, I often think about the mother bear who entrusted me with her most precious possession, and the cub who taught me that love means being able to let go. In a world where the line between brutality and domestication seems so blurred, they reminded me that compassion knows no bounds, and that trust can be born in the most unexpected places to overcome fear and prejudice. When visitors ask me about the small wooden bear statue on the shelf, I smile and say it's just a souvenir from the Adirondacks. But for me, it's more than that, a reminder of the few weeks my home became a refuge for a wild creature and I became, if only briefly, the guardian of a life I was never meant to preserve, only to protect, before returning it to its rightful owner, the endless forest and the mother who never stopped waiting.